So it started, I want to say 5 years ago when I don't know if some people know the story, some don't, but I'll share it again. When at the time, my husband, my son's father, he abandoned my son and I. And I I've been a manifester my whole life. I've been studying energy my whole life. And I remember being mad at God. I have a relationship with God, source, universe. And I remember just waking up and thinking like, how did I, being someone who's intentional and conscious, what did I do to get here? And from that moment, I would listen to podcasts. Like that's all I had was back then was podcasts. And I remember laying in bed and I didn't know what I was going to do next because again, I was abandoned. I had no money to my name. Unfortunately, he wiped even our son's bank accounts clean. He had a double life. He was a gambler. And I pretty much was laying in bed at my sister's house because I had to move in with family, and something was like, "Start a podcast." Now, the interesting thing is when you get the voice of inspiration, the voice that follows is fear, right? So, and right away it
So
was like, "Well,
true.
who's gonna
So
listen to
true.
your podcast? Like, who are you?" And I remember, luckily at the time, I remember that I purchased like I still have it. It was like a $100 little microphone. I would record either in the bathroom. That's where my podcast started, in the bathroom of my sister's
Yes.
home, or in my car when I would just get away from the noise of everything that was toxic in my sister's house at the time. And I remember sitting in the car one day and it was raining. My son was at daycare and I was taking this very seriously. Like my car was my studio at the time. Okay. And I remember thinking, again, that fear, who's going to listen to you? And that little voice said, even if one person, just one, hears your podcast, you did something. So I started my podcast. I took it very seriously, intentionally would show up week after week after week with the energy of, I have the number one podcast in the world, even though I didn't, right? It was just my
Totally.
energy within and let me just rewind for a second. I always write down my goals, right? Like what I want to accomplish in the year, in the next few months. And I wrote down Entrepreneur Magazine. And for some reason, when I wrote that down, it kind of really stuck in my mind, which I think planted a seed into the universe. And within, I want to say 8 months, one of my other friends was getting featured in this article. And he had asked me, if you send in your podcast, maybe you'll get on the list too. Now, mind you, this is Entrepreneur Magazine. You're up against probably hundreds of other podcasts. And I remember sending it in. I didn't hear anything for weeks. And in those weeks, this is the free will that we'll get into. I had the free will to decide, am I going to not believe in myself and think I lost the chance? Or am I going to still have that same energy of, I got it, right? I got it and I don't need to think about it. So I really believe that I got it. And then I finally got the email that I got it. And from there, the branding, the marketing, everything took off. And then people started contacting me on social media. How did you do it? This. And I started coaching people. It went from coaching to starting helping them brand themselves. And one thing after another, then those same people needed PR. So I dove into PR. So for me, it was an organic, you know, branding, marketing, PR was step by step. I learned everything, step by step. I didn't jump into anything without learning the thing before.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the critical pieces that you speak to often, whether it's on Clubhouse or your show. And she also has a show on iHeartRadio called The Money Frequency on Fridays and Sundays. So she's definitely vocal about everything that she's learned. And I think it's interesting because a lot of times people will learn things and then they just keep them in like their own reservoir of information. And like, you must pay in order to get this, right? Like there's a portal, there's an access point, and it takes $1 to extract, where you have always been so giving of the information because one, and this is what I've learned, is that you can give every single thing that you know, but it's the activation of that information that often puts people in that stagnation point where you were talking about. They can take on the world and then they get all the information in front of them, and we do it ourselves. And we're like, wait a second, I can't do this by myself. I need help. I need support. And you are that agent to help support and create that accountability associated to, this is the roadmap to get there, but that it looks different for every single person. Talk to us through like how it's been different for you in the way of approaching it versus I think how a mass majority approach PR and media and branding even.
Yeah, and I love this because the truth is, I've learned being in the space and learning it myself and trying to go through other people is people hold on to information to get paid for their information, which I can understand, right? But if I think of abundance, because I operate from energy and faith before I operate on money and anything else.
Yep.
Let's start
Yeah.
there, right?
Yeah. So good.
So if I'm just a vessel for this information and this skill, and someone comes to me and I have the information, why not give it to them? It's not like they're taking anything away from me. It's not like we all can't shine. I had a conversation with a friend yesterday and I said, abundance is believing that everybody wins. Not if you win, I lose. So if you get the information and you do something different with it, great. I can't be like, if you get the information and I do something different, I'm going to lose and you're going to, get the upper hand. If I think like that, I need to check my own spirit. I need to ask myself where that fear comes from within me, why I have scarcity, why I doubt my self-worth. So that all stems from me. So I learned the more I give, the more I'm actually confronting my own fears.
I think the word that I was like ruminating on as you were talking about is the creativity piece that comes after you get new information, right? It's like, here is all the things. And because we have our own lens, because we have our own ability, because we perceive things differently based on our own stories and journeys, it's pretty impossible for someone to take the exact same information and do the exact same thing because we're all created so differently. And that's the part of abundance that I think is beautiful. It's like if we, threw a bunch of seeds into a garden, are we anticipating that they're all going to be in the exact same way, shape, form? They're all going to face the sun the exact same way? Like, no, that'd be so boring. There's so much beauty in the differentiating qualities of every single person. And yet we can all thrive and survive with the resources that we're given, whether it's money, whether it's light, whether it's love, whether it's patience, whatever fruit of the spirit you want to speak to, natural or not natural. But ultimately it's all meant for us to have that space of prosperity. I think it's so powerful, even when it comes to attention or quote unquote influence. Right. And that's a part where people have been talking even about Web3. I don't know how much conversations you've had in like what that's supposed to look like as it evolves, but to know that we, the creators, are meant to own the things that we're creating and how everyone is going to have access, but not everyone can be a social media influencer. Eventually, if everyone has millions and millions or billions of followers, like who do we believe at that point? And what does that actually look like from a branding perspective? So I'd love, do you have any insight or thought pattern toward what's to become of the media realm?
You know, I have to say that people assume that organic media is dying because of all these things that are coming out. And I have to tell you, that's far from the truth. Authenticity is always going to win. Authenticity is timeless. It's classic, right? Things that are classic never die. That's just what I'm
So
seeing.
good.
And I have some friends who are in the pay to play space. And I'm like, guys, you got to get out of this space. Like, we got to get out. We got
For
to get out
sure.
before you
For
drown.
sure. Yeah.
Drown in there. Get out.
Yes.
Um, in terms of Web3 and all this stuff, I've had some conversations. Actually, my previous podcast episode, Matt Gottsman had a conversation with me about it. So I'm not like too familiar with it, but I am familiar with the concept of having something that's completely yours that your audience can be a part of, which I love. And I love it even more so because it's the long game. That Web3 is more of the long game than the quick, like let's just make a quick buck on this
Yes.
NFT
Yes.
or, thing. So I love that even more because you grow as a community. So now your community, your influence is actually potentially helping others too, maybe even financially or events or, so there's so much that's going on. And it's interesting because I have a children's book that I never put out yet. Um, I went through like 3 different artists and nobody stuck. Like one, my lawyer just didn't want, the other one, she drew something and it was just a whole mess. And now that there's this Web3, I'm thinking, well, was it divine timing? Like,
Wow.
this
Yeah.
is where it's going to go because it's a spiritual
Wow.
children's book.
Yeah.
And it means a lot to me because this is a very interesting story. So the day I was finished, well, the night I was finishing this book, my mother was calling and I was like, "Ah, I'll call her back because I'm editing." I'm like a serious
Of course.
editor all the time. I'm like, I'm
Of
editing.
course.
Um, and I hate to say this, but my mother passed away that night, so that was her last phone
Mm,
call to me. So I've
mm,
held on to this book,
mm.
and I've always believed in divine timing. So I have this feeling that maybe Web3 would be the perfect place for this.
Wow. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing. And now I can't wait to have my hands on it just to be a part of that, journey, whether the book is meant for me or not. But I think this is where that connectivity piece and also that phraseology that I've heard you say before, it's like that media, that attention, that growth, all of these things, even associated to this conscious idea of media or public relations, it is a long game. And you've spoken a lot into like the relational building, the relational capital associated to putting out something into the world that's worthwhile, something that's meaningful rather than that quick flip or that, quick fix even. Talk me through about like what that's looked like for you that's different than a majority of the people in your industry.
Well, first of all, let's start with the word influence, right?
Mm-hmm,
You
mm-hmm.
have to ask yourself, what's your intention for your influence, right? Like,
That's so good.
I've never been fame driven, and that could come from the fact that I've been around a lot of money my whole life. So I didn't need those
Yeah.
things. I grew
Yeah.
up with them,
Yeah.
so that's what keeps me grounded and humble is I've already experienced the finances and I've experienced the cars and so for me I was like, this is just my life. Like, I don't, what's the point? So I decided to just honestly ask myself my intention, because I study energy. The number one thing, and I'm just going to give your audience a quick little
Please,
lesson
please.
here. So you know how they say like when something great happens and before it happens you announce it and then it goes wrong?
Yep.